The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morrison Industries' executive floor as Maya Thompson pushed her cleaning cart down the hushed corridor. At 26 years old, she had been working as part of the overnight cleaning crew for almost 3 years, a job that paid just enough to cover her studio apartment in the Bronx and her evening classes at community college. Her dark brown skin glistened slightly with the effort of her work, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that she refreshed every few hours to maintain the professional appearance the cleaning company demanded. Maya had always been invisible in these halls. The executives who occasionally worked late barely glanced at her as they rushed past, their minds occupied with mergers, acquisitions, and profit margins that existed in a world far removed from her own. She had learned to move quietly, to blend into the background, to become part of the furniture that decorated these opulent spaces. But Maya carried a secret that none of these powerful people could have guessed, a gift given to her by the man who had raised her since she was 7 years old. Her stepfather, Rajesh Patel, had come into her life when her mother remarried, bringing with him not just love and stability, but the rich tapestry of his Indian heritage. From the moment they met, Rajesh had treated Maya as his own daughter, teaching her about his culture, cooking traditional meals, and, most importantly, speaking to her in Hindi. At first, it had been just a few words here and there, simple phrases that made her giggle as a child. But, as the years passed, Rajesh made it a point to speak Hindi with her every evening, determined that she would be fluent in the language that connected him to his roots. Now, as an adult, Maya spoke Hindi as naturally as she spoke English. It had become a private language between her and Rajesh, something special they shared. She had never mentioned this skill on her job applications or to her coworkers. Why would she? The cleaning company didn't ask, and it had never seemed relevant to scrubbing toilets and emptying trash bins in a corporate tower where everyone spoke English. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maya was running behind schedule. One of the other cleaners had called in sick, and she had been assigned to cover the executive floor in addition to her regular duties. She worked quickly but thoroughly, knowing that any complaint could cost her this job she desperately needed. The executive suite was always intimidating with its expensive artwork, plush carpeting, and the kind of furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year. As she approached the corner office belonging to Richard Morrison, the billionaire CEO and founder of Morrison Industries, she noticed that the lights were on inside. This was unusual. The executive floor was typically empty by the time the night cleaning crew arrived at 11. Maya hesitated, wondering if she should skip this office and come back later, but her supervisor had been clear about completing the entire floor before her shift ended. She knocked gently on the partially open door, a courtesy that was probably unnecessary given her lowly position. When no one answered, she pushed the door open wider and peered inside. The office was massive, easily the size of her entire apartment. One wall was entirely glass, offering a breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline glittering in the darkness. The opposite wall was lined with bookshelves containing leather-bound volumes that looked more decorative than functional. Maya was about to step inside when she heard voices coming from the private conference room attached to Morrison's office. The door was slightly ajar, and, through the gap, she could see 2 men seated at a polished mahogany table. One was Richard Morrison himself, a man in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of confident posture that came from decades of unchallenged authority. The other man was younger, perhaps in his late 30s, with dark hair and brown skin that suggested South Asian heritage. Maya recognized the younger man as Vikram Desai, Morrison's personal assistant and right-hand man. Vikram had started with the company about 5 years ago and had quickly risen through the ranks to become indispensable to the CEO. The rumor among the cleaning staff was that Morrison trusted Vikram more than anyone else in the company, that the assistant knew every secret, every deal, every skeleton in the corporate closet. She should have announced her presence, should have asked if they wanted her to come back later. But something in the tone of their voices made her pause. They were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, and even though she couldn't make out the words yet, the atmosphere felt charged with tension. Maya found herself frozen in place, her hand still on the handle of her cleaning cart. Then, Vikram began speaking in Hindi, his voice clear and animated. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She understood every word. Sir, the plan is moving forward perfectly, Vikram said in Hindi, his English words for sir standing out in the otherwise Hindi sentence. The pension fund reallocation will be complete by the end of the month. We're talking about $800 million that we can redirect into the offshore accounts before anyone notices the discrepancy. Maya felt her blood run cold. She stood perfectly still, afraid that even the slightest movement would alert them to her presence. Her mind raced to process what she was hearing. Pension fund, offshore accounts? This sounded serious, potentially criminal. Morrison responded in English, his voice calm and measured. And you're absolutely certain that no one on the board suspects anything? What about the auditors? Vikram switched back to Hindi, speaking rapidly now. The auditors are looking at last quarter's numbers. By the time they get to this quarter, the money will already be moved, and the documentation will show routine investment rebalancing. I've created a paper trail that makes it look completely legitimate. The pension fund trustees won't notice anything unusual because the quarterly statements will show the expected returns. We're just borrowing from the future contributions to cover the current shortfall. Borrowing, Morrison repeated with a dry laugh. That's one way to put it. And the workers whose pensions we're borrowing from. Vikram's response in Hindi was chilling in its casualness. Most of them won't retire for another 20 to 30 years. By that time, either the market will have recovered enough to cover the gap, or the company will be restructured in a way that eliminates the pension obligations altogether. Either way, it's not our problem. These are factory workers and warehouse staff, not exactly sophisticated investors. They have no idea how pension funds actually work. Maya felt sick to her stomach. She thought about the older workers she sometimes saw in the building, men and women in their 50s and 60s who still came to work every day, probably counting down the years until they could retire with the pensions they had been promised. Morrison Industries employed thousands of people across the country in manufacturing plants and distribution centers. How many of them were working hard, believing that their futures were secure, having no idea that their retirement money was being stolen right out from under them? Morrison stood up and walked to the window, his back to Vikram. What about the reports to the SEC? If anyone decides to dig deeper into the quarterly filings, will they find anything? Vikram responded in Hindi again, his tone confident and almost proud. I've structured everything to be technically compliant with reporting requirements. The language is vague enough that it could be interpreted multiple ways. We're reporting the pension fund as adequately funded based on projected returns that are optimistic, but not completely unrealistic. If anyone questions it, we can say we were relying on expert actuarial analysis. I've already had 3 different consulting firms provide reports that support our position, even though we cherry-picked the assumptions they used. You've thought of everything, Morrison said, turning back to face his assistant. There was something in his tone that Maya couldn't quite identify. Was it admiration? Concern? Regret? That's what you pay me for, sir, Vikram replied in English, then switched back to Hindi. Besides, in the current economy, everyone is making tough choices about employee benefits. We're not doing anything that dozens of other companies aren't also doing. We're just being smarter about how we do it. Morrison sat back down, and Maya could see his face more clearly now. He looked tired, older than his years. Sometimes I wonder how we got here, Vikram. I built this company from nothing. I used to know every employee by name. Now I'm planning to steal from people who trust me to take care of them. The vulnerability in Morrison's voice surprised Maya. For a moment, he sounded almost human, almost guilty. But Vikram's response, delivered in rapid Hindi, crushed any hope that the CEO might change his mind. You got here by making hard decisions that other people weren't willing to make. That's why you're a billionaire sitting in this office while they're punching time clocks in your factories. Sentiment is a luxury you can't afford, not when you have shareholders demanding returns and competitors trying to undercut you at every turn. This pension fund situation is just business. It's what has to be done to keep the company competitive. Morrison nodded slowly, seeming to accept this rationalization. When will the transfers begin? I'll initiate the first batch tomorrow, Vikram said, back in English now. Small amounts that won't trigger any automatic alerts. Over the next 3 weeks, we'll move it all. By the time anyone could potentially notice, it'll be too late to trace where the money actually went. Maya realized she was holding her breath. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was afraid they might hear it. Very slowly, she began to back away from the doorway, moving her cleaning cart as quietly as possible. Every small noise the wheels made sounded deafening to her ears. She expected at any moment for one of them to notice her, to demand to know how long she had been standing there. But the two men were too engrossed in their conversation to pay attention to anything outside their bubble. Maya made it back into the corridor and stood there for a moment, her legs shaking. She looked down at her hands and saw that they were trembling. What had she just witnessed? What was she supposed to do with this information? She thought about going to the police, but what would she say? She had no evidence, just an overheard conversation. Would they even believe her, a cleaning woman with no proof, accusing one of the most powerful businessmen in New York of fraud? And even if they did believe her, how would she explain how she understood what Vikram had been saying in Hindi without revealing that she had been eavesdropping? Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. She could go to the media, but that seemed equally problematic. Reporters would want sources, evidence, something concrete. All she had was her word against that of a billionaire and his trusted assistant. She would probably lose her job, might even face a lawsuit for defamation. Morrison Industries had lawyers, lots of them, the kind who could destroy someone like her without breaking a sweat. But if she did nothing, thousands of workers would lose their pensions. People who had given their lives to this company, who had trusted that they would be taken care of in their old age, would be betrayed. How could she live with herself knowing that she had the information to stop this fraud, but had been too afraid to act? Maya forced herself to calm down and think rationally. She needed evidence. Testimony about an overheard conversation wouldn't be enough, especially since she had technically been eavesdropping. She needed documents, emails, something that proved what Morrison and Vikram were planning. But how could a cleaning woman possibly get access to that kind of information? An idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, probably illegal, and could backfire in a dozen different ways. But it might be her only chance. She looked down at her cleaning cart, at the simple tools of her trade, and then looked back at Morrison's office. The executive suite was empty except for the two men in the conference room. She had keys to every office on this floor. The cleaning company trusted her because she had never given them a reason not to. Maya took a deep breath and made a decision. She would come back tomorrow night, and she would find the evidence she needed. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for or where to find it, but she knew she had to try. The faces of the workers she had seen in this building over the years flashed through her mind. The security guard who always wished her good morning, the warehouse supervisor she had met once in the elevator who had talked proudly about how he was almost ready to retire, the maintenance worker who had shown her pictures of his grandchildren and talked about the trip he was planning to take once he could collect his pension. These were real people with real lives and real dreams for their futures. They deserved better than to be casually robbed by executives who saw them as nothing more than expendable resources. And Maya, invisible Maya who cleaned their offices and emptied their trash, might be the only person in a position to help them. She finished cleaning the rest of the executive floor on autopilot, her mind consumed with planning her next move. When she passed Morrison's office again an hour later, it was dark and empty. The two men had left, presumably to go home to their expensive apartments and sleep soundly, untroubled by guilty consciences. Maya clocked out at 7 in the morning, exhausted but unable to even think about sleep. She rode the subway back to the Bronx in a daze, watching the other passengers without really seeing them. How many of them were working jobs like hers, trusting that if they just worked hard enough, they would be okay? How many were being taken advantage of by employers who saw them as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet? When she got home to her tiny studio apartment, she sat on her bed and called the one person she knew she could trust with this secret. Rajesh answered on the third ring, his voice warm and concerned when he heard the tension in her tone. "Maya, beta, what's wrong? You sound upset." She told him everything, switching between English and Hindi as she recounted the conversation she had overheard. Rajesh listened without interrupting, and when she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "This is very serious, Maya," he finally said. These men are talking about stealing from thousands of workers. But you need to be careful. People with this kind of money and power can be dangerous when they're threatened. I know, Dad, Maya said, using the title she had called him since she was 8 years old. But I can't just do nothing. Those workers deserve to know what's happening to them. Rajesh sighed. I taught you to speak Hindi so you could connect with your heritage, not so you could spy on criminals. But I also taught you to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. If you're going to do this, you need to be smart about it. You need evidence, and you need to be very, very careful. They talked for another hour, with Rajesh helping her think through the logistics of what she was planning. He had worked in corporate finance for years before retiring, and while he had never been involved in anything illegal, he understood how these systems worked. He explained what kind of documents she should look for, what kind of evidence would be most damaging, and, most importantly, how to protect herself. The Morrison Industries building looked different to Maya that night as she badged through the security entrance. Every shadow seemed darker, every security camera more intrusive. She forced herself to smile at Marcus, the night security guard she had known for 2 years, and exchanged their usual pleasantries about the weather and the latest basketball game. She couldn't let anyone suspect that anything was different about this shift. You okay, Maya? Marcus asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. You seem a little tense tonight. Maya managed a laugh that sounded almost natural. Just tired. Had to help my mom move some furniture this afternoon, and my back is killing me. It was a lie, but a small one. Marcus nodded sympathetically and waved her through. As Maya rode the elevator up to the executive floor, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished metal doors. She looked the same as always, her cleaning company uniform neat and pressed, her ID badge clipped to her collar. But her eyes told a different story. They held a mixture of fear and determination that she had never seen in herself before. The executive floor was empty and silent when she arrived, just as it had been the previous night. Maya went through her usual routine first, cleaning the common areas and the smaller offices, building up her courage for what she was about to do. Every few minutes, she glanced at the clock, watching the hours tick by. She had decided to wait until around 3 in the morning, when even the most dedicated workaholics would have gone home and the building would be at its quietest. At 2:45, Maya positioned her cleaning cart outside Morrison's office and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her key ring. The cleaning company had given her master keys to every office on the floor, trusting that their employees would use them responsibly. What she was about to do was a complete violation of that trust, and if caught, she would certainly lose her job and possibly face criminal charges for breaking and entering. But she thought about those pension funds, about the $800 million that was about to be stolen from workers who had done nothing wrong. She thought about her stepfather, now retired and living comfortably on his pension, and how devastating it would have been if that security had been taken from him. She thought about the casual cruelty in Vikram's voice when he had dismissed the workers as unsophisticated people who wouldn't understand what was being done to them. Maya unlocked the door and stepped inside Morrison's office. She left the lights off, using only the small flashlight on her phone to navigate the space. The office was exactly as it had been the night before, luxurious, imposing, filled with symbols of wealth and power. She moved quickly to Morrison's desk, a massive piece of furniture made from what looked like exotic wood. The desk was remarkably clean, with only a laptop, a phone, and a few carefully arranged documents on its surface. Maya knew she wouldn't find anything incriminating just lying out in the open. She tried the desk drawers, but they were all locked. She hadn't expected that to be easy. She turned her attention to the filing cabinets along one wall. To her surprise, they weren't locked. Inside, she found rows of neatly labeled folders containing contracts, correspondence, and financial documents. Maya began photographing pages with her phone, not really knowing what she was looking for, but hoping something would be useful. Most of it was incomprehensible to her, legal jargon and financial terms that might as well have been written in a foreign language. After 15 minutes of fruitless searching, Maya felt despair beginning to creep in. She had been naive to think this would be easy, that evidence of fraud would just be sitting around waiting for her to find it. People like Morrison and Vikram didn't become successful by being careless. They would have covered their tracks, hidden the evidence in places she couldn't access. Then, she remembered the conference room where she had overheard the conversation. She moved to the connecting door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the conference room was dominated by a long table surrounded by expensive leather chairs. One wall was covered with a whiteboard that had been recently erased, though Maya could still make out faint traces of what looked like numbers and arrows. On the credenza against the far wall, she spotted a stack of folders. Unlike the organized files in Morrison's office, these seemed more casually arranged, as if someone had been working with them recently and planned to come back. Maya picked up the top folder and opened it. Her heart began to race as she realized what she was looking at. The folder was labeled Pension Fund Restructuring, Confidential. Inside were spreadsheets showing the current pension fund allocations and proposed changes. Maya didn't understand all the financial details, but even she could see that the numbers didn't match up. The current fund value was listed as $820 million. The proposed restructuring showed that value being reduced to just under $50 million, with the rest listed as transferred to supplementary investment accounts. She photographed every page, her hands steadier now that she had found something concrete. The next folder contained email printouts, correspondence between Vikram and various financial institutions about setting up offshore accounts. The language was careful and coded, but the intent was clear enough. One email explicitly mentioned ensuring that the transactions cannot be easily traced back to the primary accounts. The third folder was a goldmine. It contained what appeared to be Vikram's personal notes and calculations, handwritten in a mixture of English and Hindi. Maya's ability to read Hindi suddenly became invaluable. While the English portions were vague and careful, the Hindi notes were shockingly explicit. Vikram had written detailed plans for how to falsify the pension fund statements, which accounting firms to use for plausible deniability, and even contingency plans for what to say if regulators asked questions. One note, written entirely in Hindi, made Maya's blood boil. The workers are too stupid and too busy trying to survive to pay attention to their pension statements. By the time they realize something is wrong, the statute of limitations will have passed. Even if someone does figure it out, we can blame it on market conditions and bad investment advice. They have no power and no resources to fight us. Maya photographed every page, making sure the images were clear and readable. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear the footsteps in the corridor until they were very close. Her heart stopped as she heard voices outside Morrison's office. She quickly turned off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, praying that whoever it was would just pass by. But the voices were getting closer, and she recognized one of them. It was Vikram, speaking in Hindi to someone on his phone. "I just need to grab those folders from the conference room. I forgot them when I left earlier." "Yes, I know it's late, but I need them for the meeting first thing in the morning." Maya's mind raced. She was trapped in the conference room with the very folders Vikram was coming to retrieve. If he found her here, with her phone full of incriminating photographs, there would be no way to explain it away. She looked around desperately for a hiding place, but the room was too open, too exposed. The only furniture was the conference table and chairs, and the credenza where she had found the folders. She heard the outer office door open. Vikram was inside Morrison's office now, and it would take him maybe 30 seconds to cross the room to the conference room. Maya made a split-second decision. She grabbed the 3 folders she had been photographing, shoved them into her cleaning cart under a pile of trash bags, and then slipped out of the conference room through the connecting door just as she heard Vikram's hand on the handle. She found herself back in Morrison's main office with Vikram in the conference room behind her, and no clear way to escape without being seen. The main door to the corridor was across the room, too far to reach without being spotted. She did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed a trash can and started emptying it, pretending she had just been doing her normal cleaning duties. Vikram emerged from the conference room looking puzzled and frustrated. He was speaking rapidly in Hindi into his phone. "They're not here. I left them right on the credenza. I'm certain of it. Someone must have moved them." He finally noticed Maya and switched to English. "You there? Have you been cleaning in here tonight?" Maya looked up, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She made her voice as calm and professional as possible. "Yes, sir. I'm just finishing up now. Is something wrong?" Vikram looked at her suspiciously. His eyes went to her cleaning cart, and for a terrible moment, Maya was certain he was going to search it. But then his phone rang, and he turned away to answer it, switching back to Hindi. "I'm telling you, they were here a few hours ago," he said into the phone. "Either someone took them or I'm losing my mind." He listened for a moment, then replied, "Fine, I'll check my office. Maybe I brought them back there and forgot. But I could have sworn I left them in Morrison's conference room." He walked past Maya without another glance, still focused on his phone conversation. Maya waited until she heard his footsteps receding down the hallway before she allowed herself to breathe. She quickly finished emptying the trash can, then pushed her cart out of Morrison's office and down the corridor in the opposite direction from where Vikram had gone. Her legs felt like jelly as she made her way to the service elevator. She had the folders, but she had also just stolen corporate documents from a billionaire's office. There was no going back now. Once Vikram realized those folders were actually missing and not just misplaced, there would be an investigation. Security footage would be reviewed. And even though Maya had technically been authorized to be in that office for cleaning purposes, taking documents was theft. She rode the service elevator down to the sub-basement where the cleaning staff had a small break room and storage area. Her hands were still shaking as she pulled the folders out from under the trash bags and hid them in her personal locker. She would have to figure out a way to smuggle them out of the building later. But, for now, they needed to be somewhere they wouldn't be found if anyone searched her cart. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of anxiety. Every time someone walked past her, every time she heard footsteps or voices, she expected to be confronted. But nothing happened. She finished her cleaning duties and clocked out at 7, just like always. Marcus waved goodbye to her from his security desk, completely oblivious to the fact that she was walking out with evidence of a massive fraud hidden in her work locker. Maya didn't sleep when she got home. Instead, she spent the morning going through the photographs on her phone, organizing them, and trying to understand exactly what she had found. The more she looked at the documents, the more convinced she became that this was bigger than just Morrison Industries. The offshore accounts Vikram had set up were connected to banks in 3 different countries. The falsified statements weren't just going to pension fund trustees, but also to government regulators who were supposed to be overseeing these funds. She called Rajesh again and sent him the photographs. Her stepfather spent the afternoon analyzing the documents, using his financial background to piece together the full scope of the fraud. When he called her back that evening, his voice was grave. "Maya, this is enormous," he said. "They're not just stealing from the pension fund. They're also manipulating the company's stock price by hiding these liabilities from shareholders. When this comes out, it could destroy the entire company. And these offshore accounts, they're not just for hiding pension money. There are connections to tax evasion, possibly money laundering." "What should I do?" Maya asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had uncovered. "You need to go to the authorities," Rajesh said firmly. "But not the regular police. This requires federal investigators, people who handle white-collar crime. I have a friend who works for the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're the ones who investigate financial fraud. I can reach out to him, set up a meeting." Maya felt a wave of relief. She wasn't alone in this anymore. "Thank you, Dad. I don't know what I would do without you." "You're doing the right thing, Beta," Rajesh said softly. "But I need you to understand that this is going to be difficult. These men will fight back. They'll try to discredit you, to destroy your reputation. They might even try to have you arrested for stealing those documents." "I know," Maya said, though saying it out loud made it feel more real and more terrifying. "But I can't just let them get away with this." The next 2 days were agonizing. Maya went to work as usual, terrified that at any moment she would be confronted about the missing folders. She heard through the office gossip network that there had been some kind of security review, that management was concerned about sensitive documents going missing. But no one seemed to suspect the cleaning staff, or at least, no one suspected her specifically. Rajesh's friend at the SEC, a senior investigator named James Chun, agreed to meet with Maya on her day off. She took the physical folders from her locker, carefully wrapped them in plastic bags, and brought them to the meeting in a nondescript coffee shop in downtown Manhattan. Chun was a serious man in his 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Maya told him everything. The overheard conversation, the documents she had photographed and stolen, her fears about what would happen to the workers if this fraud went through. Chun listened intently, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "Miss Thompson, what you've brought me is potentially very valuable," he said slowly. "But I need to be honest with you about the situation you're in. First, the way you obtained this evidence is problematic. You had authorization to be in that office for cleaning purposes, but taking documents goes beyond that. Morrison Industries could potentially press charges against you for theft." Maya's heart sank. "So the evidence can't be used?" "I didn't say that," Chun replied. "The SEC isn't bound by the same rules as criminal prosecutors when it comes to how we obtain information. We can't use illegally seized evidence directly, but we can use it as a roadmap for our own investigation. These documents tell us where to look, what questions to ask, what records to subpoena. The question is whether you're willing to accept the risk of what might happen to you personally." "I am," Maya said without hesitation. "Those workers deserve to know the truth." Chun nodded approvingly. "Then, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take these documents and the photographs you've provided. My team will begin a preliminary investigation to verify their authenticity and to gather additional evidence through legal channels. We'll subpoena records from the banks, the accounting firms, and Morrison Industries itself. This process could take months, possibly even years." "Years?" Maya repeated, dismayed. "But they're planning to move the money by the end of this month. That's less than 2 weeks from now." "Leave that to me," Chun said. "If what you've shown me is accurate, and I believe it is, we can get an emergency restraining order to freeze those accounts and prevent any transfers while the investigation proceeds. But I need you to understand that once we start this process, there's no going back. Morrison and his lawyers will figure out where the leak came from. They'll come after you." Maya thought about her small apartment, her night classes, the simple life she had built for herself. She thought about how easy it would be to just walk away, to pretend she had never overheard that conversation. But then, she thought about the security guard at her building, a man named James who was 63 and talked constantly about retiring next year. She thought about the warehouse workers she had met, people with families and mortgages and dreams for the future. "I understand," she said. "When do we start?" Chun reached across the table and shook her hand. "We already have. Thank you for coming forward, Miss Thompson. What you're doing takes real courage." As Maya left the coffee shop, she felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. She had set something in motion that she couldn't control, couldn't stop. Whatever happened next would change her life forever. But for the first time since she had overheard that conversation in Morrison's office, she felt like she had done the right thing. She had no way of knowing that within a week, her face would be on the The emergency restraining order came through on a Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Maya's meeting with James Chun. She was at home, trying to catch up on sleep before her night shift, when her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Thompson, this is James Chun. I wanted to let you know that federal marshals executed our restraining order about an hour ago. Morrison Industries' offshore accounts have been frozen, and we've secured all relevant documents from their offices. Richard Morrison has been informed that he is under investigation and has been ordered not to leave the country." Maya sat up in bed, her heart racing. "So it's really happening?" "It's really happening," Chun confirmed. "And I need to warn you that things are about to get very intense. Morrison's lawyers are already threatening to sue everyone involved. They're claiming the restraining order was obtained under false pretenses. They don't know yet that you're the source of the initial information, but they're going to figure it out soon. You need to prepare yourself." "How do I prepare for something like this?" Maya asked, feeling the weight of what was coming settle on her shoulders. "First, you need a lawyer," Chun said. "The SEC can provide some protection for whistleblowers, but you're going to need your own representation. I have some names I can give you. Second, you should probably stop going to work at Morrison Industries. It's not safe for you there anymore." The reality of that statement hit Maya hard. Her job at Morrison Industries was how she paid her rent, how she afforded food, and her college classes. If she stopped going to work, she would have no income. But Chun was right. Once Morrison and Vikram figured out who had leaked their plans, her position in their building would be untenable at best and dangerous at worst. I understand, Maya said quietly. What happens now? We continue building the case, Chun replied. The documents you provided have been authenticated, and we found additional evidence through our subpoenas that corroborates everything. But these investigations take time. In the meantime, Morrison and his team are going to do everything they can to discredit the investigation and anyone associated with it. Chun wasn't exaggerating. By Monday morning, the news had broken. Every major media outlet was reporting on the SEC investigation into Morrison Industries and the potential pension fund fraud. The initial reports were careful and fact-based, citing unnamed sources and emphasizing that the investigation was ongoing. But by Tuesday, Morrison's public relations machine had kicked into high gear. Morrison held a press conference where he stood in front of a backdrop featuring the Morrison Industries logo and spoke with the confidence of a man who had never been truly challenged in his life. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit immaculate, his expression one of righteous indignation. These allegations are completely baseless, he declared to a room full of reporters and cameras. They are the result of a coordinated attack on this company by competitors who want to see us fail and by regulators who are overstepping their authority. Morrison Industries has always been in full compliance with all pension fund regulations. Our employees' retirement savings have never been safer. He went on to paint the SEC investigation as a politically motivated witch hunt, claiming that the government was targeting successful businesses to score points with voters. He talked about the thousands of jobs Morrison Industries provided, the charitable foundations he supported, the innovations his company had brought to the market. He was smooth, persuasive, and completely convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth. Maya watched the press conference from her apartment, feeling sick to her stomach. Morrison was lying with such confidence, such authority, that part of her almost doubted her own memories of what she had heard and seen. But then, she remembered those documents, the handwritten notes in Hindi where Vikram had laid out their plans with shocking clarity. She remembered the casual cruelty in their voices when they discussed stealing from workers who trusted them. The media coverage intensified over the following days. Financial analysts debated whether Morrison Industries could survive the investigation. The company's stock price plummeted, wiping out billions in market value. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Employees at Morrison's factories and warehouses began to panic, worried about their jobs and their pensions. And then, as Chun had predicted, the attention turned to Maya. It started with a leak to a business news website. An unnamed source at Morrison Industries claimed that the SEC investigation had been triggered by a disgruntled employee who had stolen confidential documents. The article didn't name Maya directly, but it described her as a low-level worker with a grudge against the company, someone who had violated the trust placed in her to gain access to private information. Within 24 hours, her identity was public knowledge. Maya never found out exactly how the press got her name, but suddenly, her phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters. News vans appeared outside her apartment building. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages, some supportive, but many viciously attacking her. Morrison's lawyers filed a lawsuit against her for theft of corporate documents and breach of confidentiality. The lawsuit sought millions in damages and included character attacks that painted Maya as a criminal and a liar. The legal papers described her as an employee of minimal education and sophistication who had no understanding of the complex financial matters she presumed to judge. The cleaning company fired her immediately, citing violation of company policy and the theft allegations. Maya's supervisor, a woman who had always been kind to her, called with an apology in her voice, but also an edge of fear. "I'm sorry, Maya, but we can't keep you on. The legal liability is too great. If you really did steal documents, we could be held responsible. I did what I had to do to protect people," Maya tried to explain, but her supervisor had already hung up. Without a job and facing a lawsuit she couldn't afford to defend, Maya felt her carefully built life crumbling around her. She had to drop out of her college classes because she couldn't pay tuition. Her landlord, seeing the news coverage and worried about the media attention, gave her 30 days notice to vacate her apartment. The attacks weren't just financial. Online trolls found her social media accounts and flooded them with racist harassment and death threats. People questioned why a black woman working as a cleaner thought she was qualified to understand complex financial matters. Conservative media personalities accused her of being part of a conspiracy to take down successful businessmen. Liberal commentators debated whether she had done the right thing by stealing documents, with some arguing that the ends didn't justify the means. Maya stopped reading the comments after she saw someone had posted her home address online with an invitation for people to teach this thief a lesson. She stayed inside her apartment as much as possible, jumping at every unexpected noise, checking the locks on her doors multiple times a night. The only bright spot came from an unexpected source. A high-profile whistleblower protection lawyer named Sarah Martinez reached out to Maya through James Chun. Martinez had represented several other corporate whistleblowers in high-profile cases and had a reputation for being tough, thorough, and dedicated to protecting her clients. When they met for the first time in Martinez's downtown office, Maya was struck by how different this lawyer was from the image of Morrison's legal team. Martinez was in her early 40s, dressed in a simple but professional pantsuit, with warm brown eyes that held both compassion and fierce determination. "I've reviewed your case," Martinez said after they sat down, "and I want you to know two things. First, what you did was incredibly brave. Those workers have you to thank for potentially saving their pensions. Second, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Morrison has virtually unlimited resources and a strong incentive to destroy your credibility. But if you're willing to fight, I'm willing to fight with you." "I don't have any money to pay you," Maya said quietly. "I just lost my job, and I'm about to lose my apartment." Martinez waved her hand dismissively. "I'm taking your case pro bono. That means no fee unless we win. And when we win, and we will win, your fees will be paid by Morrison as part of the settlement. In the meantime, I have a client relief fund that can help with your immediate expenses." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because what Morrison did to those workers is unconscionable," Martinez replied simply. "And because people like you, who risk everything to do the right thing, deserve protection and support. The law has whistleblower protections for a reason. We're going to use every single one of them." True to her word, Martinez immediately filed countersuits against Morrison Industries for wrongful termination, harassment, and attempting to intimidate a federal witness. She also worked with the SEC to ensure that Maya was formally designated as a protected whistleblower, which provided her with certain legal shields and potential financial rewards if the investigation resulted in successful prosecution. But even with Martinez's help, the pressure on Maya continued to mount. Her mother called her in tears after reporters showed up at her house asking questions. Rajesh received threatening phone calls warning him to tell his stepdaughter to drop the case. Even Maya's friends from college began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the controversy and media attention. The loneliness was overwhelming. Maya spent her days in her apartment, too afraid to go out because of the photographers and protesters who sometimes gathered outside. A small but vocal group had taken up Morrison's cause, painting him as a victim of government overreach and Maya as a criminal who was trying to destroy a successful company. One particularly difficult night, Maya sat alone in her dark apartment, scrolling through the latest wave of attacks on social media. Someone had created a fake account in her name, posting inflammatory statements. Another person had photoshopped her face onto pornographic images. The level of vitriol and hatred directed at her was staggering. She called Rajesh, needing to hear a friendly voice. He answered immediately, as if he had been waiting for her call. "I don't know if I can do this, Dad," Maya said, her voice breaking. "Maybe I should just drop everything, apologize, try to make this go away." "Maya, Beta, listen to me," Rajesh said firmly. "I know this is hard. I know it feels like the whole world is against you. But you need to remember why you started this. Those workers, thousands of them, are going to keep their pensions because of what you did. Their children will have parents who can retire with dignity. Their futures are secure because you had the courage to speak up. But what about my future?" Maya asked. "I've lost everything. My job, my apartment, my privacy. People hate me, and they don't even know me. You haven't lost everything, Rajesh insisted. You still have your integrity. You still have people who love you and believe in you. And you still have the truth on your side. The people attacking you are doing so because they're afraid. They're afraid of what it means if someone like you, someone they thought they could ignore and exploit, actually has power. His words resonated with something deep inside Maya. She thought about all the times in her life she had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as invisible. Growing up black in a society that often devalued her, working jobs where she was seen as less than, being in spaces where people assumed she couldn't understand or contribute. This was bigger than just Morrison Industries. This was about whether someone like her could stand up to someone like Morrison and actually win. You're right, Maya said slowly. I can't give up now. That's my girl, Rajesh said with pride in his voice. Now get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day, and you need your strength. The next morning brought news that changed everything. James Chin called to tell Maya that the SEC investigation had uncovered evidence beyond what she had originally provided. During their review of Morrison Industries' records, they had found a pattern of financial manipulation going back years. The pension fund theft was just the latest in a long series of fraudulent activities. We've also found something else, Chin said, and Maya could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Remember those offshore accounts Vikram set up? It turns out Morrison wasn't just using them to hide pension money. He was also hiding personal income to evade taxes. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in unreported income over the past decade. What does that mean for the case? Maya asked. It means we have him, Chin said simply. Tax evasion is one of the few crimes that wealthy people actually go to prison for in this country. The IRS is now involved, along with the SEC. Morrison's lawyers can spin the pension fund issue as a complicated financial matter open to interpretation. They can't spin tax evasion. The numbers are what they are. The news broke that afternoon. Federal prosecutors announced that they were bringing criminal charges against Richard Morrison for tax evasion, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Vikram Desai was charged as a co-conspirator. Both men were taken into custody, though they were released on bail within hours. The public perception began to shift. It was one thing for Morrison to claim he was being persecuted by overzealous regulators over complex financial matters. It was another thing entirely for him to have been caught hiding hundreds of millions from the IRS. Suddenly, the narrative changed from successful businessman under attack to billionaire tax cheat caught breaking the law. Maya watched Morrison's perp walk on television, seeing him led out of a federal building in handcuffs, his perfect hair disheveled, his confident expression replaced with barely contained rage. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, only a deep sense of relief that the truth was finally coming out. The media coverage shifted too. Reporters who had previously questioned Maya's motives now started calling her a hero. Op-eds appeared praising her courage and calling for stronger protections for whistleblowers. The racist harassment continued from some corners of the internet, but it was now drowned out by messages of support from people who admired what she had done. Morrison Industries' board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Morrison as CEO. The company issued a statement apologizing to their employees and shareholders and promising full cooperation with the federal investigation. They announced that the pension funds would be fully restored and that an independent oversight committee would be established to prevent future mismanagement. Sarah Martinez called Maya with more good news. Morrison's lawyers have reached out about settling your wrongful termination case. They want this to go away quietly. I think we can get you a substantial settlement, plus a guarantee that they won't pursue their theft allegations against you. How substantial? Maya asked. I'm thinking 7 figures, Martinez said. Possibly 8, depending on how hard we push. They're desperate to control the narrative and limit their legal exposure. Your case is a reminder of their fraud every time it appears in the news. They want it gone. Maya thought about what that kind of money could mean. She could finish college. She could help her mother and Rajesh. She could start over somewhere new, somewhere without the constant reminders of what she had been through. But she also thought about all the other workers who might face similar situations in the future, all the other people who might see wrongdoing and be too afraid to speak up because they saw what had happened to her. I want something else too, Maya said to Martinez. I want Morrison Industries to establish a fund for worker advocacy and whistleblower support. And I want them to implement new protections for employees who report corporate wrongdoing. If they agree to that, along with the financial settlement, then I'll settle." Martinez laughed with genuine delight. "You know, most people in your position would just take the money and run. But you're still thinking about other workers. I'll make the proposal." To Maya's surprise, Morrison Industries agreed to all her terms. The settlement, when it was finalized, gave Maya enough money to secure her future and also created lasting protections for other workers. The company established a whistleblower fund with an initial endowment of $50 million, designed to provide legal and financial support to employees who reported corporate wrongdoing. The criminal trial of Richard Morrison and Vikram Desai began 6 months in the months following the trial. Maya found herself navigating a world she had never anticipated entering. The settlement money and the whistleblower reward from the SEC totaled just over $12 million after taxes and legal fees. It was an amount so staggering that Maya sometimes had trouble comprehending it was real. She had grown up in modest circumstances, worked minimum wage jobs most of her life, and counted every dollar to make sure she could pay her bills. Now she had more money than she could have earned in several lifetimes. The first thing she did was pay off her mother's mortgage and set up a retirement fund for Rajesh and her mother. When she told Rajesh about the money she wanted to give them, he cried for the first time since she had known him. He tried to refuse at first, saying that she had earned it through her own courage and sacrifice. But Maya was insistent. "You gave me the gift of Hindi," she told him. "Without that, I never would have understood what Morrison and Vikram were planning. This money exists because you took the time to teach a little girl about your culture and language. It belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." Rajesh finally accepted, and Maya felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the man who had raised her with such love and dedication would never have to worry about money again. She also set up college funds for her younger cousins and made anonymous donations to organizations that supported workers' rights and whistleblower protection. But the money, while life-changing, was the least significant part of her transformation. Maya had become a public figure, someone whose name was recognized across the country. She received hundreds of speaking invitations from universities, corporate ethics conferences, and advocacy groups. At first, she turned them all down, uncomfortable with the attention and unsure what she could possibly say that would be worth hearing. It was Sarah Martinez who finally convinced her to start accepting some of the invitations. "You have a platform now that most people could only dream of," Martinez told her over coffee one afternoon. "You can use it to make a real difference. Think about all the workers out there who see wrongdoing but are too afraid to speak up. You can show them it's possible. You can advocate for better protections, stronger laws, real accountability." Maya's first speaking engagement was at a labor rights conference in Chicago. She was terrified as she stood backstage, listening to her introduction and hearing herself described as a hero and a champion of workers' rights. When she walked onto the stage and saw hundreds of faces looking at her expectantly, her mind went blank. For a moment, she couldn't remember a single thing she had planned to say. Then, she looked into the audience and saw an older black woman in the third row who reminded her of her grandmother. The woman was wearing what was clearly her best dress and was watching Maya with an expression of such hope and pride that it broke through Maya's panic. This woman had come here to hear her story, to find inspiration or guidance, or just the knowledge that someone like her could stand up to power and win. Maya took a deep breath and began to speak from the heart. She told them about working the night shift, about being invisible in the halls of power, about the moment she heard that conversation in Hindi and realized she had stumbled onto something terrible. She talked about the fear she felt, the doubts, the nights when she wondered if she was making a catastrophic mistake. "I'm not special," she told the audience. "I'm not braver or smarter or more capable than anyone else. I was just in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. But what I learned is that ordinary people have more power than we think. We have the power of truth. We have the power of our voices. And when we use those powers, even the most powerful people in the world have to answer for their actions." The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand, and thank her. Some were workers who had faced their own ethical dilemmas. Others were students studying labor relations or business ethics. Many were just regular people who had followed her story in the news and wanted to tell her how much it meant to them. One young Latino woman, probably around Maya's age, waited until almost everyone else had left before approaching her. "I work in accounting for a construction company," she said quietly. "I've seen some things that I think might be fraud, but I've been too scared to report it. After hearing you speak, I think I'm going to do it. I think I have to." Maya gave the woman Sarah Martinez's contact information and the details of the whistleblower support fund she had helped establish. As she watched the woman walk away with a new determination in her step, Maya felt something shift inside her. This was her purpose now. She might never clean another office or clock in for an overnight shift, but she could use her experience and her platform to help others find the courage to do what was right. Over the next year, Maya accepted more speaking engagements, carefully choosing opportunities where she felt she could make a real impact. She spoke at business schools, teaching future executives about the human cost of corporate fraud. She testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger whistleblower protections. She worked with advocacy groups to push for legislation that would make it harder for companies to retaliate against employees who reported wrongdoing. She also went back to school, enrolling full-time at a university to finish her degree. But instead of the general business degree she had been pursuing while working nights, she chose to study labor relations and corporate ethics. Her professors were sometimes startled to have a student in their classes who had lived through one of the most high-profile corporate fraud cases in recent history. Maya's contributions to class discussions brought a real-world perspective that textbooks couldn't provide. Her fellow students treated her with a mixture of admiration and awkwardness. Some seemed intimidated by her story and kept their distance. Others wanted to befriend her, but clearly saw her more as a celebrity than a peer. It took time for Maya to find her place in the campus community, but eventually she connected with a group of students who were passionate about social justice and workers' rights. Together, they formed an advocacy group that worked on local labor issues and provided support to workers dealing with unfair employment practices. The media attention began to fade as time passed, which Maya welcomed with relief. There were still occasional interviews and news features, especially around the anniversaries of Morrison's conviction, but she was no longer the constant focus of cameras and reporters. She could go to the grocery store without being recognized, could sit in a coffee shop without someone approaching her to talk about the case. But some things never completely returned to normal. Maya still checked the locks on her doors multiple times before bed, a habit formed during the months when she received death threats. She was careful about what she posted on social media, aware that there were still people who hated her for what she had done to Morrison. And she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, reliving the moment when she stood in Morrison's office with stolen documents and heard footsteps approaching. The trauma of what she had been through was real, and Sarah Martinez helped her find a therapist who specialized in working with whistleblowers and people who had faced public scrutiny. Through therapy, Maya began to process the complex emotions she felt about everything that had happened. The guilt she felt about the Morrison Industries employees who had lost their jobs when the company downsized after the scandal. The anger at the people who had attacked her character and threatened her safety. The fear that still sometimes paralyzed her when she thought about what could have happened if things had gone differently. But therapy also helped her recognize her own strength and resilience. She had survived something that would have broken many people. She had stood up to billionaires and their armies of lawyers. She had told the truth even when it cost her everything she had built. And she had emerged on the other side not just intact, but transformed into someone who could help others facing similar challenges. 2 years after the trial, Maya was invited to speak at a conference for corporate compliance officers. These were the people responsible for ensuring that companies followed the law and maintained ethical standards. Maya wasn't sure what she could tell them that they didn't already know, but the organizers were insistent that her perspective would be valuable. As she prepared her remarks, Maya thought about all the compliance officers who must have been at Morrison Industries over the years. They must have seen signs of the fraud. They must have had suspicions or concerns. Yet somehow Morrison and Vikram had been able to operate their scheme for years without being caught. What had prevented those compliance officers from speaking up or digging deeper? In her speech, Maya challenged the compliance officers to think about the culture of their organizations. You can have all the policies and procedures in the world, she told them. But if workers don't feel safe reporting concerns, if they believe that speaking up will cost them their jobs, then those policies are meaningless. The reason I was able to expose Morrison's fraud wasn't because I was particularly brave or clever. It was because I was in a position where I literally had nothing to lose by speaking up. But no worker should have to wait until they're desperate before they can tell the truth. She talked about the importance of anonymous reporting systems, of protecting whistleblowers from retaliation, of creating cultures where ethical concerns were taken seriously rather than dismissed or covered up. She urged them to remember that behind every policy and every regulation were real people whose lives could be destroyed by corporate fraud and misconduct. The response was overwhelming. Several compliance officers came up to her afterward with tears in their eyes, telling her about ethical concerns in their own organizations that they had been afraid to address. One man confessed that he had resigned from his previous job rather than continue to participate in what he suspected was fraudulent accounting. Maya listened to their stories and realized that there were probably thousands of people like them out there, caught between their professional responsibilities and their fear of retaliation. This gave Maya an idea. She used some of her settlement money to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting corporate whistleblowers and reforming whistleblower protection laws. She hired a small staff of lawyers, investigators, and advocates who could provide guidance and support to people facing ethical dilemmas at work. The organization also pushed for legislative reforms at both the state and federal level, working to strengthen protections and increase penalties for companies that retaliated against whistleblowers. The work was challenging and often frustrating. Change came slowly, and there were setbacks and defeats along the way. But there were also victories. New laws were passed in several states providing stronger protections for whistleblowers. Companies began to implement better reporting systems and training programs. And most importantly, Maya's organization helped dozens of workers navigate the difficult process of reporting fraud and misconduct without destroying their lives in the process. One case in particular stood out to Maya. A young immigrant woman named Rosa contacted the organization after discovering that her employer, a meatpacking plant, was systematically cheating workers out of overtime pay and ignoring serious safety violations. Rosa was terrified of reporting the problems because she was undocumented and feared deportation. But she was also troubled by watching her coworkers get injured and exploited. Maya worked personally with Rosa, helping her understand her rights and connecting her with immigration lawyers who could protect her legal status. Together, they gathered evidence of the violations and reported them to the Department of Labor. The case resulted in the meatpacking plant being fined millions of dollars and forced to implement major safety improvements. Hundreds of workers received back pay for overtime they had been cheated out of. And Rosa, rather than being deported, received a special visa status reserved for crime victims who assist law enforcement. When Rosa came to Maya's office to thank her after the case was resolved, she brought her young daughter with her. "I want her to grow up knowing that you don't have to accept injustice," Rosa said through tears. "I want her to know that even people like us, people with no money or power, can stand up for what's right." Maya thought about her own mother, who had worked so hard to provide for her as a child. She thought about Rajesh, who had taught her that heritage and culture were gifts to be shared. She thought about the cleaning woman she had been, invisible and overlooked, who had discovered that invisibility could sometimes be a source of power. "You're the one who stood up," Maya told Rosa. "You're the one who had the courage to report what you saw, even though you were afraid. I just provided some support and resources. The bravery was all yours." But Rosa shook her head. "I could be brave because you showed me it was possible. When I saw your story on the news, when I heard how you stood up to that billionaire, I thought maybe someone like me could do it too. You gave me hope." That conversation stayed with Maya long after Rosa left. She realized that her story had become bigger than just her own experience. It had become a symbol, a proof of concept that ordinary people could challenge powerful institutions and win. Every time someone like Rosa found the courage to speak up, Every time a worker reported fraud or misconduct, every time truth prevailed over power, it was partly because Maya had shown that it was possible. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that night in Morrison's office to this moment, sitting in her own nonprofit organization's headquarters, helping other whistleblowers navigate the same treacherous path she had walked. The fear and trauma had been real, and there were parts of the experience she would never want to repeat. But there was also a deep sense of purpose and meaning that she had never felt before. Maya's life had been transformed in ways she could never have imagined. She was no longer a cleaning woman working night shifts and struggling to pay rent. She was an advocate, a speaker, a leader in the whistleblower protection movement. She had testified before Congress, been featured in documentaries, advised on legislation that protected workers' rights. But, in some fundamental way, she was still the same person who had stood in that corridor 3 years ago, listening to powerful men plan to steal from vulnerable workers, and had decided that she couldn't stay silent. The external circumstances had changed dramatically, but the core of who she was, the values that had driven her to act, remained the same. 5 years after the Morrison Industries scandal, Maya found herself standing in front of a very different building than the one where her journey had begun. This was not a gleaming corporate tower in Manhattan, but a modest community center in the Bronx, not far from the apartment where she had lived when she worked as a cleaner. The center had fallen into disrepair over the years, its programs cut due to lack of funding. But Maya had recently purchased the building and was in the process of transforming it into a headquarters for worker advocacy and whistleblower support. The renovation was nearly complete. The old building now housed legal offices where workers could get free consultations, training rooms where people could learn about their rights, and a resource center with computers and internet access for those who needed help documenting workplace violations or filing complaints. There was also a small apartment on the top floor, and Maya had made a decision that had surprised many of her friends and colleagues. She was moving back to the Bronx. After years of living in a comfortable apartment in an upscale neighborhood, surrounded by the trappings of her newfound wealth, Maya had realized that she felt disconnected from the community she was trying to serve. The workers who came to her organization for help often looked at her expensive clothes and polished appearance and seemed to doubt that she could really understand their struggles. And, in some ways, they were right. The further she got from her own experiences as a low-wage worker, the easier it became to forget what that life was actually like. So she was moving back, not to the studio apartment she had once struggled to afford, but to a simple space above the center where she could be fully immersed in the work. Her mother thought she was crazy, and even Rajesh had gently questioned whether she was making this choice out of some misguided sense of guilt. But Maya knew it was the right decision. This was where she belonged. On the day of the center's grand opening, hundreds of people showed up. There were workers from local businesses, students from nearby schools, community organizers, and even a few reporters who still followed Maya's work. Sarah Martinez was there, having become not just Maya's lawyer but a close friend and advisor to the organization. James Chun from the SEC came, bringing with him several colleagues who had worked on the Morrison case. And, of course, Rajesh and Maya's mother were there, beaming with pride as they watched their daughter cut the ribbon and officially open the doors. But the most meaningful moment for Maya came when she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Marcus, the security guard from Morrison Industries who had always greeted her kindly during her night shifts. He was older now, his hair grayer, but his smile was the same warm expression she remembered. "Marcus," Maya said, making her way over to him. "I can't believe you came." "Wouldn't have missed it," Marcus replied, pulling her into a hug. "You know, I always knew there was something special about you, even back when you were pushing that cleaning cart around. You had this way of really seeing people, not just looking through them like they weren't there." They talked for a while, and Marcus told her that he had retired from Morrison Industries the previous year. His pension, which had been fully restored after the fraud was uncovered, was allowing him to live comfortably and even help his grandchildren with college expenses. "You saved my retirement," he told her seriously. "I worked for that company for 37 years, and if Morrison had gotten away with his plan, I would have lost everything. Instead, I'm financially secure, and it's because of you." Stories like Marcus's still moved Maya deeply. She had saved the pensions of thousands of workers, but hearing it from someone she actually knew, someone whose face she could put to the abstract numbers, made it real in a way that statistics never could. This was why she had done it. This was why it had all been worth it. The center quickly became a hub of activity. Workers came in with questions about wage theft, discrimination, unsafe working conditions, and a dozen other workplace issues. Maya's staff of lawyers and advocates helped them navigate the complex systems of labor law and corporate accountability. They filed complaints, negotiated settlements, and, when necessary, took cases to court. But Maya also created programs that went beyond legal support. She started English and financial literacy classes for immigrant workers. She brought in career counselors to help people understand their options and plan for better futures. She established a scholarship program for the children of low-wage workers, knowing that education was often the key to breaking cycles of poverty and exploitation. One program in particular became her passion project. Maya created a training program for workers who wanted to become advocates themselves. She taught them how to recognize workplace violations, how to gather evidence, how to report problems safely, and how to support their co-workers who were facing exploitation. She was building an army of informed, empowered workers who could identify and challenge injustice in their own workplaces. The program attracted people from all walks of life. There was James, a former factory worker who had lost his job when his plant closed but wanted to help other workers avoid the problems he had faced. There was Aisha, a young Somali immigrant who had experienced horrific working conditions in a garment factory and was determined to help others in similar situations. There was David, a former corporate manager who had become disillusioned with the business world and wanted to use his inside knowledge to help workers understand how companies operated. Maya trained them all, sharing not just practical skills, but also her own experiences. She talked honestly about the fear and doubt she had felt, about the costs of standing up, and the ways the system could be manipulated to protect wrongdoers. But she also talked about the power of solidarity, the importance of documentation, and the surprising strength that ordinary people could find when they stood together. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Aisha stayed behind to talk with Maya. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said hesitantly. "Of course," Maya replied. "Do you ever regret it? Not the outcome, but the price you paid? The fear, the attacks, the things you had to give up?" It was a question Maya had been asked many times, but Aisha's sincere expression and obvious concern made her think about her answer more carefully than usual. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally. "I regret that we live in a world where workers have to risk everything to get justice. But do I regret my specific actions? No, because the alternative was to let thousands of people be robbed without even trying to stop it. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had done that. I'm thinking about reporting my old employer," Aisha confessed. "The factory where I used to work, they're doing terrible things. Locked exits, no breaks, workers getting hurt, and being threatened if they complain. But I'm scared. I have family members who still work there. I'm scared of what might happen to them if I speak up." Maya understood that fear intimately. "Let's talk through it," she said. "Let's figure out how to gather evidence safely, how to protect your family members, how to involve the right authorities. You don't have to do this alone." Over the next several months, Maya worked closely with Aisha to build a case against the garment factory. They documented violations, gathered testimony from other workers, and coordinated with labor regulators. When they finally filed the complaint, they did so with such comprehensive evidence that the factory owners couldn't dispute the charges. The factory was shut down, the owners faced criminal charges, and the workers were awarded substantial damages for the violations they had endured. But, more importantly, Aisha emerged from the experience transformed. She had found her voice and her power. She went on to become one of Maya's most effective trainers, specializing in helping immigrant workers who faced exploitation. Her story became another example of how one person's courage could ripple out to help many others. As the center's work expanded, Maya began to see patterns in the cases they handled. Certain industries were repeat offenders. Certain types of violations were widespread, but rarely prosecuted. Certain communities were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. This data became the basis for policy advocacy work, as Maya and her team pushed for legislative reforms at the city, state, and federal levels. She testified before the New York City Council about wage theft in the restaurant industry. She worked with state legislators to strengthen penalties for companies that retaliated against whistleblowers. She collaborated with federal lawmakers on bills to expand worker protections and streamline the reporting process for labor violations. The work was slow and often frustrating. Political realities meant that even obviously beneficial reforms could get bogged down in committees or defeated by corporate lobbying. But there were victories too. A new city ordinance that made wage theft a criminal offense rather than just a civil matter. A state law that protected undocumented workers who reported labor violations from immigration consequences. A federal initiative that increased funding for labor enforcement agencies. Each victory was small in the grand scheme of things, but collectively they added up to real change. Workers had more protections, more resources, more support. The balance of power was shifting slowly but perceptibly in favor of those who actually did the work rather than those who merely profited from it. Media interest in Maya's story had mostly faded, which she appreciated. She was no longer a novelty or a symbol, just someone doing important work. But occasionally something would bring her back into the public eye. A documentary about corporate whistleblowers featured her prominently. A book about the Morrison Industries scandal became a bestseller. And sometimes, another high-profile case would emerge that reminded people of her story. One such case involved a major technology company that had been systematically misclassifying workers to avoid paying benefits. The whistleblower was a young programmer who had noticed the practice and reported it to regulators. The company's retaliation had been swift and brutal, destroying the programmer's reputation and career. When the programmer contacted Maya's organization for help, she took the case personally. The battle was fierce. The tech company had far more resources than Morrison Industries had possessed, and they used every legal and public relations weapon at their disposal. But Maya had learned a lot in 5 years. She knew how to navigate the media, how to build public support, how to pressure regulators to act. And, crucially, she had a network of other whistleblowers and advocates who rallied to support the programmer. The case took 3 years to resolve, but eventually the tech company was forced to pay hundreds of millions in settlements and completely overhaul their employment practices. The programmer, whose life had been nearly destroyed by the retaliation, was vindicated and became a leading voice for tech worker rights. During the victory celebration, the programmer came up to Maya with tears streaming down their face. "I almost gave up so many times," they said. "But I kept thinking about your story, about how you stood up to Morrison even when everyone said you couldn't win. You gave me the courage to keep fighting." Maya hugged them tightly, thinking about how strange and wonderful it was that her worst experience had become a source of inspiration for others. She had never wanted to be a hero or a symbol. She had just wanted to do the right thing. But somehow, in doing that, she had shown countless others that doing the right thing was possible. As Maya approached her 10th year since the Morrison Industries case, she was invited to speak at the company's annual meeting. The invitation came from the new CEO, a woman named Jennifer Chun, who had been brought in to rebuild the company's reputation and culture. Morrison Industries was a very different company now, having divested many of its problematic divisions and implemented industry-leading corporate governance and ethics programs. Maya initially declined the invitation. She had no desire to revisit that building or to be associated with the company that had tried to destroy her. But Jennifer Chin called her personally, making an impassioned plea. "I understand your reluctance," Chin said, "but Morrison Industries has worked hard to change. We've implemented every reform you advocated for. We have strong whistleblower protections, independent oversight, transparent reporting. Our workers are unionized and have real power in company decisions. I want you to see what we've become, and I want our employees to hear from you. Many of them don't really understand the history, how close this company came to destroying thousands of lives. They need to hear that story from you." Maya thought about it for several days before finally agreeing. When she walked into the Morrison Industries headquarters for the first time in a decade, the building looked different. The cold, corporate opulence had been replaced with a more welcoming design. The walls displayed photos of employees at all levels of the company, not just executives. And, most strikingly, there was a large display in the lobby titled, "Our Commitment to Ethical Business: Lessons from Our Past." The display featured a timeline of the Morrison scandal, the investigation, and the reforms that had followed. And prominently featured was a photo of Maya herself, identified as Maya Thompson, whistleblower and advocate, whose courage exposed corporate fraud and led to fundamental reforms in how we operate. Seeing her own face on that wall, being honored by the very company that had once tried to destroy her, was surreal. Jennifer Chun met her in the lobby and gave her a personal tour of the building, showing her the various changes that had been implemented. There was an ethics hotline with protections for anonymous reporting. There was an employee advocacy office staffed by workers' rights lawyers. There was regular training on identifying and reporting misconduct. "We want to make sure what Morrison did can never happen again," Chen explained. "And we tell every new employee your story as part of their orientation. We want them to know that this company was saved by someone who had every reason to stay silent, but chose to speak up instead." The annual meeting was attended by hundreds of Morrison Industries employees from around the country. Maya spoke to them about her experience, but also about the changes she had seen in the company and the importance of maintaining a culture where ethics mattered more than profits. She talked about the workers whose pensions had been saved, including Marcus, who had agreed to attend and share his own perspective. After the speech, employees lined up to talk with Maya. Many thanked her for saving the company and their jobs. Others shared their own experiences with workplace ethics and the comfort they felt knowing there were protections in place if they ever needed to report problems. One young employee, who couldn't have been more than 25, told Maya that he had chosen to work for Morrison Industries specifically because of its reformed culture and reputation for treating workers fairly. "Your story is literally taught in business schools as an example of why corporate ethics matter," the young man said. "I studied your case in 3 different classes. You're kind of a legend." Maya smiled at the irony. She had gone from being invisible to being a legend, all because she happened to understand a conversation in Hindi that she wasn't supposed to hear. But the real legacy wasn't her personal story. It was the changes that story had helped bring about, the workers who had been protected, the company that had been transformed, the systems that had been reformed. As she left the Morrison Industries building that day, Maya thought about the cleaning woman she had once been, pushing a cart through these same halls, invisible to the executives who passed her. She thought about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. She was still fundamentally the same person, driven by the same values, committed to the same principles of justice and fairness. But the world around her had changed. Workers had more power, more protection, more voice. Whistleblowers had resources and support that hadn't existed before. Companies faced real consequences for fraud and exploitation. None of these changes were complete or perfect, but they were real and meaningful. That evening, Maya returned to the center in the Bronx where she now lived and worked. She climbed the stairs to her modest apartment and stood by the window, looking out over the neighborhood. In the distance, she could see the Manhattan skyline glittering against the night sky, including the Morrison Industries building where her journey had begun. She thought about all the workers in those buildings, the people who cleaned the offices and secured the lobbies and kept the infrastructure running. She thought about how many of them might be facing their own ethical dilemmas, witnessing their own injustices, wondering if they had the power to make a difference. And she hoped that somewhere out there, another person was finding the courage to speak up, to act, to refuse to stay silent. Because change didn't come from heroes or legends. It came from ordinary people making extraordinary choices, one after another, until the accumulated weight of their courage forced the world to transform. Maya Thompson had been one of those ordinary people. She had been a cleaning woman with no power, no resources, no reason to believe she could challenge a billionaire and win. But she had done it anyway, armed with nothing but the truth and the unwillingness to let injustice go unchallenged. And in doing so, she had proven that invisible people were never really invisible. They had always been there, watching and listening and understanding far more than the powerful people realized. They had always had voices, even when no one was listening. They had always had power, even when they didn't know how to use it. Maya had simply shown them what was possible. And in a world that desperately needed more people willing to speak truth to power, that was perhaps the most important legacy anyone could leave. 10 years after overhearing a conversation in Hindi in a billionaire's office, Maya Thompson stood in her apartment and smiled. She had lost so much in the beginning: her job, her privacy, her sense of safety. But she had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that one person, armed with truth and courage, could actually change the world. It wasn't easy. It wasn't safe. It wasn't comfortable. But it was possible. And in a world where workers were so often told they had no power, that possibility was everything. Maya turned away from the window and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new workers seeking help, new battles to fight. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. She had done what she set out to do. She had protected workers, exposed fraud, and built systems that would help others long after she was gone. The journey that had started with an overheard conversation had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of thousands of others. And it wasn't over yet. As long as there were workers being exploited and powerful people abusing their positions, there would be work to do. But Maya was ready for it. She had been invisible once, underestimated, and overlooked. Never again. She was Maya Thompson, whistleblower, advocate, and living proof that courage and truth could triumph over money and power. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. As Maya prepared for another speaking engagement that evening, this time at a law school where she would talk about the intersection of whistleblower protection and corporate governance, she looked at herself in the mirror and saw not just how far she had come, but how much further there was to go. The fight for justice, for accountability, for a world where workers could speak truth to power without fear, was far from over. But she was no longer fighting alone. She had built a community of advocates and supporters. She had helped create structures and systems that would protect others who found themselves in the position she had once been in. And every day, she was working to ensure that the next Maya Thompson, whoever and wherever they might be, would have a better chance of being heard and protected when they chose to do the right thing. The money and recognition were nice, but they weren't why Maya continued this work. She did it for Rosa and her daughter, for the workers whose pensions she had saved, for every person who had ever been made to feel invisible or powerless by those with authority over them. She did it because 3 years ago, a billionaire had assumed that a black woman cleaning his office wouldn't understand Hindi, wouldn't recognize fraud when she heard it, and wouldn't have the courage or resources to do anything about it even if she did. He had been wrong on all counts, and Maya intended to spend the rest of her life proving, over and over again, just how wrong powerful people could be when they underestimated the strength and determination of ordinary workers who refused to be invisible anymore. Later, Maya was called to testify about the conversation she had overheard and the documents she had found. Taking the stand was terrifying. Morrison's defense attorneys tried to paint her as a criminal who had stolen documents she didn't understand and then built an elaborate conspiracy theory around them. But Maya stood firm. When asked how she had understood Vikram's conversations in Hindi, she spoke proudly about her stepfather and the gift he had given her by teaching her his language. When questioned about whether she regretted her actions, she looked directly at the jury and said, "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that men in positions of power thought they could steal from hardworking people and get away with it. But I don't regret doing everything I could to stop them." The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts against both Morrison and Vikram. Morrison was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $800 million in fines and restitution. Vikram received a 10-year sentence. Both men were also permanently barred from serving as officers or directors of any public company. Maya watched as they were led away in handcuffs, their expensive suits a stark contrast to the orange jumpsuits they would soon be wearing. She felt none of the triumph she had expected, only a quiet sense of justice being served, and the hope that perhaps this would serve as a warning to others who might be tempted to abuse their power in similar ways. As she left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and cameras, Maya thought about how far she had come from that night when she had stood frozen in Morrison's office, listening to a conversation she wasn't supposed to understand. She thought about all she had lost and all she had gained, the fear and the courage, the loneliness and the unexpected alliances. She was no longer invisible. For better or worse, Maya Thompson had become a public figure, a symbol of what one person could accomplish when they refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. And while she sometimes missed the anonymity she had once taken for granted, she knew she would make the same choice again if given the chance. O&T page of every major newspaper in the country, or that Richard Morrison would be arrested as he tried to board a private plane to a country with no extradition treaty, or that her testimony would eventually help send both Morrison and Vikram to prison for decades. All she knew in that moment was that she had found evidence of a terrible crime, and she had brought that evidence to people who could do something about it. Maya Thompson, the invisible cleaning woman, had become a witness for the truth. And though the path ahead would be difficult and dangerous, filled with legal battles and personal attacks, she would never regret the decision she had made. Because some things are more important than personal safety or comfort. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. As she rode the subway back to the Bronx, Maya pulled out her phone and looked at the photograph she had taken of Vikram's note, the one where he had called the workers too stupid to understand what was being done to them. She felt a fierce satisfaction knowing that those workers would have their chance for justice, that the truth would come out, that the people who had tried to steal from them would be held accountable. She thought about calling her mother and Rajesh to tell them what she had done, but decided to wait. There would be time enough for explanations later. For now, she just wanted to sit with the knowledge that she had made a difference, that her ability to speak Hindi, the gift her stepfather had given her, had become the key to unlocking justice for thousands of people. The subway rumbled through the darkness, carrying Maya toward whatever future awaited her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she would face it with her head held high. She had been invisible for so long, dismissed, and overlooked by the powerful people whose offices she cleaned. But she had proven that even the most invisible person could have power when armed with the truth. And the truth, once revealed, could not be silenced. By the time they hung up, Maya had a plan. It wasn't a great plan, and it involved taking risks that terrified her, but it was better than nothing. She set her alarm for late afternoon, knowing she needed to get at least a few hours of sleep before her shift that night. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those workers, people like her stepfather who had spent their lives working hard and playing by the rules. They deserved someone to fight for them, even if that someone was just a cleaning woman who happened to speak Hindi. Maya fell asleep with her mind still racing, unaware that the decision she had made would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose one of the biggest corporate frauds in recent history, cost her almost everything she had, and transform her from an invisible cleaner into an unlikely hero. The next evening, as she prepared to return to Morrison Industries for another night shift, Maya Thompson had no idea that she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. All she knew was that she had been given information that could help thousands of people, and doing nothing with that information was not an option she could live with. She packed her cleaning supplies with extra care that night, making sure everything was in order. To anyone watching, she looked exactly like she always did, just another cleaning woman starting another shift. But inside, Maya's heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Tonight, she would take the first step in a journey that would test everything she believed about justice, courage, and the power of one person to make a difference.